Hello everyone, my name's Jake Roos. I'm Climate Change Manager at Greater Wellington Regional Council. So when the Rural Advisory Group asked what's Greater Wellington doing about climate change, it fell in my lap. So here I am. This makes perfect sense. But I have brought along a few friends and colleagues with me as well, because it's a big topic. So let's see, putting it this way, please work. Here we go. Yeah. All right. Well,
okay, we'll move on.
Okay, next slide. I'll just do it that way. Oh, what a shame. Okay, it was working before, of course. Of course. Hey, here we go.
Yes.
All right. So we've got a range of people here from a regional council. So there's myself. There is Tom Fitzgerald, who is project lead of regional adaptation for the Wellington Region Leadership Committee. There is Jeannie Marks, who's program director of the Wairarapa Water Resilience Strategy. We have Tash Stiles, who is catchment manager in the environment group, who you may know, and Will Seibert, who is team leader policy in the environment group. And as well as that, we and of course Pam Guest, who is senior advisor in my team at the moment, climate change team, but she has been involved with policy in her usual role. And we're also going to be joined by Lucie Douma from FMG, who will be speaking on Teams about how they are dealing with climate risk through and the effects that they're seeing as an insurance company. So yes, we're going to rattle through quickly. We're right on time. Okay, so we should be good. I'm going to start with the big picture of climate change. I've only got one slide on this, but I'll talk for a little while. Next one, please. There we go. So I heard some of the bit of the chat in the room beforehand, before the meeting. And there was mentions of the flying chicken shed in the Huranui, which landed on top of a ute. I think they pulled the ute out from underneath it at this point. But yes, the windstorms is just an example of some extremely powerful weather, and of course, weather is occasionally powerful. Though, having said that, our emergency operations centre, which I'm involved in, actually it's called the Emergency Coordination Centre at the Greater Wellington, is activated 3 times this year, and the last time it activated was Kaikoura earthquakes. So it's been a very, very busy year for weather, and it's all been severe winds. And so essentially, attribution of individual events is difficult, but what we do know is that Earth's capturing more energy. That energy causes more evaporations. It causes greater differences in high and low pressure gradients, which creates stronger winds. And then it expresses itself through more extreme weather. And rural communities in the firing line, essentially, they cover a lot of territory, so just by their very nature, and so they're going to see a lot of impacts like these impacts that we're seeing here. And then there's the immediate impact of things being damaged, but they don't necessarily have to be on the farm, of course. Down south, it's the rural power networks that have taken a hiding and really tested the resilience of those communities, to manage the issue, milking and so forth and shuffling generators around. I was watching the news and there was a fellow that was feeling, I think smug would be an exaggeration, but pleased with his investment in a 100 kilowatt solar system and battery, which allowed his milking shed to just keep on going throughout all of the disruptions. And he was advising that maybe some other people would want to do that too, because this could well happen again. And obviously the consequences of not being able to milk cows could be very, very serious indeed. And as it is, it's a really stressful time for those communities. When these events happen, it's hard. It's hard on them. yes, of course, the communities rally together and find a way through, which is fantastic. But it's hard. And what climate change will do is make events like this more and more frequent. So dealing with it every once in a while, and you've got a few years to build up your reserves again and to fix everything, and then that's not so bad. But when the hits come more frequently, when it's not every few years, but every year or several times a year, then you're in a completely different territory in terms of being able to cope. And yeah, things will change. Like the course that we're on is really for the world to be a whole lot warmer. And Jeannie will be talking about how the Wairarapa, and for one example, will be getting a whole lot drier. But the effects don't have to be local to affect us. Obviously, we're reliant on all sorts of imported stuff. The farmer who was very pleased with his solar panels, they weren't manufactured in Southland. They're reliant on global supply chains to all sorts of other places in the world, which will actually be affected a whole lot worse than us. I think that's really important. I was reading one study the other day that's saying that that basically currently there's the places in the world that people live. We like to live in places which are fairly temperate and comfortable. That's where we've settled. And where there aren't a lot of people is where it's very, very hot, like the middle of the Sahara Desert. It's just one of the hottest places on Earth, and there's hardly any people there. It's obvious, right? Under the unmitigated emission scenario, within 50 years, large swaths of the Earth will be as hot as the Sahara Desert. And these are places where currently billions of people live, not millions, but billions. So if you do the math, we're basically heading into area of disruption, and we have an advantage down here in New Zealand. We're a temperate country. We'll continue to be a temperate country, even with climate change, even under these scenarios. The temperature will all be very tolerable. We'll be feeling all sorts of impacts, but we're in some respects the lucky ones. Yeah, okay, next slide. Did anyone in this room have any damage from the windstorms that they've been dealing with? What happened at your place?
Our 4.5 metre roller door decided to reinvent itself as a flag.
Oh, yeah.
And while the fire brigade were there tying it down, the chook shed threatened to go and visit the neighbours.
Oh, so yours too. Okay, yeah.
It was only a little chook shed, not a great big thing.
Yes, the lady on the news was saying there was 950 chickens in her chook shed that went flying, and so but apparently they managed to round them all up again. I'm not quite sure. I mean, chickens would have been flying all over the shop, but I don't know. They must have been all stunned and easy to gather back together again. Anyway, if you go to the next one, please. So Greater Wellington and climate change. So the actual business as usual of Greater Wellington involves a lot of stuff which is climate change friendly or climate change adjacent, or just plain old directly squarely in the climate change frame. So for example, public transport, that's a low emissions way to get around, and we're the providers of that. Flood protection, more floods, all right, well, we're to some extent what we're doing in terms of things like this picture here of Riverlink, yeah, will mitigate some of those risks from the climate impacts. Flooding, I already mentioned the Emergency Coordination Centre, so when things really kick off, we're directly involved in the response. Planning policy you'll be familiar with as well, which has sorts of intersections with climate. Erosion control planting, you're probably aware of Greater Wellington's work there, stabilising hillsides. Environmental restoration and all sorts of varieties of that around the place. Ecosystems have been restored. Generally, they're more resilient to climate impacts as well. And then there's a whole environmental monitoring arm that our council does in terms of collecting data. And then more specifically, I'm involved in emissions management and reporting of GW ourselves and of the region as a whole. And that's just BAU work now. However, there are very few legally mandated climate change roles, specifically for local government. For the most part, what we do is either climate change adjacent anyway, like provision of public transport, or something like regional emissions reporting or emissions reduction of council. That comes about because councillors have said to us it's important, and the councillors and ourselves have checked in with the public through our long-term plans to gain their support for those sorts of activities. In terms of legal mandates, the biggest thing that I've heard of so far coming through is regarding the National Adaptation Framework, which my colleagues will talk about later. But on that two-pager, that's all it is, very, very easy framework to read. It says that local government will get more involved in adaptation and they don't have a choice in the matter. Yes, sir.
There's nothing on there about drought mitigation.
Oh, there's all sorts of things. Sorry, this is including but not exclusive list.
So drought's quite a risk for the wild.
Oh, in terms of impacts, yeah, on my previous slide, I mentioned all sorts of impacts. My colleagues will be talking more about that later. Yeah. So adaptation framework, we'll be talking about that later too. Next slide, please. So in terms of our climate change strategy, we set our first climate change strategy in 2015 at a very high level. It said that we'd get involved in reducing emissions across our operations and areas of influence. It says we will help the region adapt to climate change and that we would empower communities as well to act on climate change. And that's still the three main directives that we're following. But on top of that, in 2019, declared a climate emergency, and what that meant in practice was that some new streams of work really sort of stepping up the action got in motion then, which I'll talk about at the moment. And those actions, they were devised back in 2019, but in large part, they've been revised subsequently. But we got support for those through the long-term plan consultation processes that happened afterwards. Next slide, please. So in terms of really sort of squarely climate actions, we've got electrification of the bus fleet and the Wairarapa trains, restoration of native forests and regional parks, securing emissions-free electricity supplies. That's a project that I'm closely involved in because that still represents a significant part of our organisational emissions. Encouraging the stadium and centre port to reduce their emissions, and they've made great strides with that. Those are both part of the GW group, if you like. We have a stake in those operations. Nation-based solutions, which we'll talk about later. We're looking at our own climate risks, how climate will impact Greater Wellington's operations. So, if there's a big flood or sea level rise, what stuff of ours, like parks or public transport infrastructure or whatever it is, how will it cope? And what should we do to prepare? And just basically considering climate change in all sorts of decisions. Yes. And finally, here's a little infographic of our progress and our projected pathway of regional emissions. So this, sorry, not regional emissions, operational emissions. So this is Greater Wellington ourselves as an operation. We've got things like our offices, we've got grazing emissions, we've got Metlink emissions, we've got centre port emissions. And essentially that's trended over time. A few things sort of shrinking down. Metlink especially has shrunk down quite a lot, and that's our electric buses. It's gone up again because we're actually running more services. That's a good thing, more people catching the bus. But when the electric trains come in, that'll cause a big dip. And when the diesel buses get phased out almost completely in 2038, that's another big drop. And so that's our gross emissions there, emissions going up. And then we also take emissions down. Through our regional parks, we have forest which is growing. We're planting more native forest, expanding those areas and restoring ecosystems. And that's the dotted line down here. This is the removals, these green bars. And if you add those two together, you get net emissions, which is the line through the middle. And the objective is to get below the zero axis by 2045 at the latest. And as you can see here, we've got a whole 7 years to play with, which is quite nice. But however, there is many a slip between the cup and the lip.
So what are the pictures of sheep and cattle, I see they're reducing
Yeah.
at the end to just about nothing. What's the story there?
So in regional parks, yeah, there are, we've got, well, it's changing all the time, but there is probably 1,000 hectares of grazing, which is just basically to control vegetation growth, essentially. As there is a land management measure, regional parks can't be used for farming per se, but grazing is allowed in order to manage the land. And so essentially, a lot of that grazing will gradually be removed in favour of restoring native bush.
That's in Wellington.
Yeah, it's in our regional parks. Yeah, so those places like Belmont Regional Park is probably the largest, but also Queen Elizabeth Park. Grazing's been gone from there for a long time. Those are really the main areas. A little bit in East Harbour Regional Park.
There's no more fire risk then.
So that's a really important consideration. So part of the restoration plan is to manage that. So the grazing that does remain is basically on the fire breaks. So for example, we don't want a fire spreading from the eastern part of Belmont Regional Park to the western part. So we need to maintain a fire break through the middle, and we won't be growing trees there, there will be grazing.
It would have to be a substantial fire break, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would. Right. Okay, I'm running over time, but this is my last slide. Yeah.
In respect to priority of budget, is it? Are you guys more emission focused than actual resilience against when things go wrong? Like I can see there's a lot of focus here on getting our carbon down and all that sort of thing, but I would have thought that prioritisation would be, generators and power redundancies and things like that would be more of a focus.
So backup generators. Yeah.
Well, I'm just like, this is great, and the whole world has to do this. But I would have thought with there's a lot of focus on emissions here, and that's great. But our threats are coming at us faster than our emissions will drop, in my opinion, with climate and all those sorts of things.
Yeah, we do both essentially, and there's a whole prioritisation process that happens through the long-term plan and with every annual plan where we toss up between those things. Yeah. So yeah, that's just a brief overview of what council is doing on climate change, but we're going to dive deeper into all sorts of aspects. So happy to talk further with you on the break, but we should probably keep moving into the next section. Right. Okay, Tom, you're up.
Good day, everyone. Tom Fitzgerald. See Lucie's online, so I'll whip through Lucie so you can get a chance to talk to these peeps about insurance. So I work for the Wellington Regional Leadership Committee, which is a collaboration of councils, iwi, and central government. And so the 10 councils, well, the councils within the Greater Wellington region plus Whenua are partly responsible for my salary. And so this work that I'll talk about today is a piece of work that was completed. It's called the Wellington Regional Climate Change Impact Assessment. It's available online. I've got a copy here as well. It's quite a dense report. It's a first pass assessment of climate risks and how they manifest around the region. So looking at the data we had and the methodology to do that was a separate report, but also that sort of high level first pass assessment of what some of those risks are and eventually where they will be, and largely a desktop exercise. There's also, so that's the website there. There's some more detail on there. The work was finished beginning of 2024. And it essentially goes through some of the conversations you've already been having around drought and flood and things, looking at some of the key natural hazards that are intensified or altered by climate change, and how you experience them. So that graph on the right there is that sort of, if you think about weather, climate being the average of weather over time, it's that classic bell-shaped curve tends to move out, and so you kind of experience more of these extreme events, and that's how climate change will manifest. So you go to flip to the next one. So we looked across the region, so from Kapiti all the way down to Wellington and then all the way up here. And And as I said, it was one of the biggest findings we had from the report and the exercise was expert-led, was that there was a significant gap in data particularly at that translating from that sort of regional level down to a more granular level at district or neighbourhood or even asset site-specific level. But on average, and you'll know this, more heat, less rain, decreases in seasonal rainfall projected. Looked at a couple of different climate scenarios. 10% less in spring and summer, but also greater evapotranspiration as well. And so you've already talked about drought and heat waves and what that means. There's a couple of pieces of information coming out. Well, there's one out already that the Ministry for the Environment have updated their climate projections and have a map that you can zoom into and have a look at all the hot days and the how it changes to frost and rainfall and those sorts of things. But Greater Wellington has a climate scientist in its team as well, who has been downscaling those projections and looking at what that means for different parts of the region. So if there are things in here that you're like, I want to know more about that, let us know and we can come back to you with some more detailed information on that.
Have they, are you updating, given the most recent announcements, pre-Brazil on what the scientists, the global kind of agreement now is? Are you updating these models?
These things always have to update.
Yeah.
When we did this in 2022, it was based on the previous set of projections, and then they do them every 6 years. And so then you go out and you have to keep updating them as things change. And then every time that changes, if you're running a flood model, that provides different parameters that come into that flood model.
Just
might mean this or it might mean this.
Presumably more frequent.
Yeah, so that's just the nature, and those are the things that councils tend to invest in is how and where they support modelling at different scales. So Jeannie will talk more about this, but essentially water resources, particularly competition for different land uses, will are projected to become more pressurised. And so obviously those have downstream impacts. One of the other elements of the climate impact assessment was a sort of first pass look at how a risk could manifest from one area and have downstream impacts into another area. So something that's, you might have your fences blown over or something, what that means, or you're unable to milk your cows, what that then means flow on. So that's sort of a longer term look at some of those economic risks. You go to the next one, please. As I said, so some of those impacts are direct and indirect. As you'll appreciate, those dry conditions threatening productivity, but also potentially posing some opportunities in terms of different land use types. So I used to work up at Northland region, seeing some different crops being grown up there in terms of pineapples and things, and so there's opportunities to diversify in some areas as well. Potentially in the viticulture region, which came through in the climate impact assessment as an opportunity. So it wasn't just focused on risk, also looked at opportunities. Forestry, and Jake's talked about the interrelationship we touched on the interrelationship with carbon credits and things as well, but those drier days, hotter days can lead to harsher fire seasons that can start a bit earlier as well. And so what that means in terms of the impacts of a fire, whether it's impacts on the assets, whether it's impacts on the actual the economic cost of that. But those large forestry areas, I think, be interesting to hear your perspective on some of these, but are increasingly crucial to the economy here and leading to potentially direct job losses and timber impacts. Flooding is another one. So an old photo here from I think the flood back in the 1960s, 70s, it was. Transport disruption is a key one. So if you think about where those key roads are or bridges and how they might get impact, you see that probably on a reasonably frequent basis already. What does that mean going forward? And obviously lifelines, utilities as well, so power, rail, rural roads, those sorts of things, telecommunications. It's about adaptation in itself is about being prepared for the here and now, but also being able to deal with the immediate problem and then looking at what does that mean going forward. If you deal with those immediate emergency responses, but provide through that process an opportunity to go, actually, can we do things slightly differently? That means that we're going to be less impacted and more resilient in the future. And that's what this overarching report is pointing to. Okay, next one. Coastal changes. Probably you'll recognise that photo. It's a road that goes along the beach at Matakona, which serves a number of properties. Down that stretch, it's the road to Ngawi on the right. You guys will be familiar with all of these, but there's a lot of rural roads, rural communities at the end of roads that can be impacted by slips, increasing sea level rise, flooding. One of the interesting things for the Wairarapa, and I've sort of avoided putting any maps up here because they're already out of date. But one of the key things that New Zealand Sea Rise was a science project led out of Victoria University came up with is that there's a heck of a lot more subsidence in the Wairarapa region around the coast, which means that sea level rise experience there is 3 or 4 times faster than it is elsewhere around the country. So that has potentially significant impacts because that brings impacts forward in time. So this was I was talking about how part of the analysis through the climate impact assessment was around this idea of compounding or cascading risks. So a risk in one sector will have a flow-on impact into a risk into another area. But there's also the possibility, and you'll know this from your experience, is that you might have a drought, it's quite dry, then it'll rain. So you have these compounding impacts that happen over time. And that's something that really helps us point out to, if you can think about where those locations are, and this is the next step for the climate impact assessment, is building a geospatial tool, a single source of truth for drought, flood impacts, all the other sort of natural hazards as well, that we can get a really good understanding of where those areas are and prioritise investment in those areas. So we're calling that geospatial tool the Geospatial Resilience Information Tool, or the GRIT, as it is, and we're working through that at the moment. But that's going to take all of this data from the regional climate impact assessment, build in local data and observations and anecdotes and experiences and some of the iwi knowledge as well, hapu knowledge around Mātauranga, around climate, put that into one spatial tool, and then that'll help us inform our flood risk reduction activities, our civil defence, community response activities, plus our areas to prioritise for sort of adaptation where risks are particularly high. And that's the mandate coming out of central government at the moment around the National Adaptation Framework, is that we need to work in the areas at highest risk. And so all of this information, yes, it's at a high level at the moment, but we will be building it from the ground up as well, so we know where those risks are going to manifest more, and therefore where do we need to invest in doing some work to actually address that. So the piece of work that I'm leading with the leadership committee is a regional adaptation project. Part of that is to align to this new national adaptation framework. So the geospatial tool, the GRIT, will help us identify where local adaptation plans will occur and where they need to occur. Single source truth I mentioned. And one of the key tools in the national adaptation framework, which we'll take and operationalise at that sort of regional and local level, will be this idea of an adaptation plan. And so that's essentially investing in those areas that are at highest risk, going through a process to understand what the impacts could be, what some of the options might be, how those options might change over time. If we choose one option, at what point will that option no longer work? And therefore, how do we change tack? And that's a key element of adaptation plans, is the ability to change tack and monitor over time, so that when things aren't working, that you actually get a really clear pathway. And this is a signal for investment, and it's how we link to long-term plans and infrastructure strategies. Adaptation plans will be at least 30 years looking in the future, so that is a clear signal for adaptation for infrastructure plans. But obviously, with some of the impacts going forward, yes, we have to deal with the here and now, but there are some impacts that will be increasingly severe over the decades to come. So what we're trying to do through the leadership committee, because the big part of the leadership committee is the future development strategy, or a regional spatial plan, as it might be under the new resource management reforms, is to go, okay, yes, we understand about risk, but actually how do we want our communities to live and thrive in these environments going forward? So try and put a slightly more aspirational spin on, yes, we need to manage risk, but we also recognise that people have their livelihoods and their lives in these places. And so we're going to set up, hoping to set up a bit of a framework that allows us to do that, that links with existing mechanisms that councils already have around planning and land use. So that that's another key element of the National Adaptation Framework. I think, is that the last one? Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, just a question, just you talked about focus on the higher risk. What brings all that together? Is it population?
Yeah.
That's highest areas, because if you're talking population, metro, with a wider, there's quite a bit of a difference there.
That's right. Yeah, and I think there's not a lot of detail, as you can imagine, from the National Adaptation Framework on exactly how you identify a highest risk area. But if you think about risk being a probability or a likelihood and a consequence, then yeah, population is one, but so are economic impacts, right? And so I think there's an opportunity for us as a region to actually set about how we might go and prioritise those areas and what's important to us. And that's the piece of work, hopefully, that's the piece of work that'll come out of some work I've got a couple of Massey University professors helping me out on, is to actually conceptualise that, build in some of those different criteria. Because there's other things in there as well, right? Like it's, yes, it's population, but it's also different parts of the population that are particularly unequally exposed to risk as well. So how do we deal with those most in need, right? And wherever that need is. So I think there's an opportunity for us to collectively think about how to do that. Be my.
Where does your responsibility lie between, say, your role as central government when it comes to environmental concerns and the effect it has on a particular region?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm effectively working at that regional level, I suppose, including Horowhenua. Is also part of the leadership committee. And so what I'm trying to do is to translate that national policy direction and turn it into something that's actually going to work on the ground. So that's kind of where I'm sitting, and that's how I've been trying to operate. Are you getting
funding from central government?
The leadership committee itself has got a tiny amount, but not a huge, really nothing in this space. The big signal from the National Adaptation Framework is that there are unlikely to be any new funding mechanisms available for dealing with.
So we can fund this as much as we do.
Well, yeah, they've, they talk a good game slightly in that if you do an adaptation plan in a high risk area, however you define that, there might be an opportunity, and this is all it says at the moment, to use that completed adaptation plan to either get some sort of regulatory relief, so make it easier to do things, or some kind of funding to do things. So that's one element. The other side of that is Shane Jones's Regional Infrastructure Fund, and whether we can use that for some of the activities. It's been used largely for stop banks at the moment, but there's probably an ability to go a little bit beyond that.
Just taking that question a bit further, so what's Greater Wellington's role currently in approving forestry licences or influencing the approval of forestry licences?
So Greater Wellington would like to take that one.
Yeah, very little, but so we there's a national environment consent for commercial forestry, and people either can do it as a permitted activity, i.e. they don't need a consent from us, or they apply for a resource consent if they don't meet certain conditions, but those conditions are all around the erosion risk of the land and the harvesting and sort of earthworks techniques. It's climate considerations aren't in there. We can't sort of consider those effects.
This is where the rubber meets the road. Forestry have actually got no rules. So in forestry, we sit out in the country. A lot of us are in neighbouring forests. A lot of people are surrounded by forests. Those forest owners don't have any water supply for fighting fires on their forests with no rule around it. So if there is a forest fire, what they rely on is hopefully a farmer's got a good dam somewhere handy and go and rob that one. Not just, so fires generally occur in the summer. So therefore that farmer relying on that dam for stock water. So is he going to say no? And then, so then be a party to let a major forest fire go and probably endanger lives. So where are the rules? So no one's got any rules around forestry. The other factor is forestry. And so there's no rules around where trees should be planted or what trees. So what you get is that you've got shallow rooted, high topped, heavy trees planted on steep slopes.
Yeah.
Now foresters, well,
I was going to say, is it worth asking the next presenter whether or not they get insurance? Things that mitigate that.
well,
Less insurance because you got fire protection.
Yeah, it'll be.
all I'm saying is that there are no rules on forestry. So when you look at planting, for example, they're planting big top trees on shallow rooted on steep slopes. Now, we've got it out our way, and the foresters that are harvesting the forests are worried that they'll get mid-slope erosion, which will send debris and stumps down an unstable gully and go straight through the buildings. Well, they're worried about it. Like they're going to try and put a debris dam, which will never hold because the land is all movable. So that's one part of it. But the second part of it is that if those trees, well, they are going to be harvested, those trees will be harvested and they'll plant another lot of pine trees on that slope again. So nobody says, well, hang on, that slope should be back in grass, put poplar and willow poles over it, which we do farming to stop the erosion, to mitigate it, or it should be in native trees, which are deep rooted, which do hold on steep slopes. So there's a whole lot of things, a whole lot of inconsistencies. And when you do all this work, like you guys do all this work, but you're actually not really looking at the basic problem.
But John, that's not the regional council's role. Central government needs to get some decent policy on forestry.
Yeah.
And that would be for the whole country.
Yeah.
And the regional council can't do it without any kind of national policy statement or anything. And frankly, local government needs to start lobbying central government much harder than they have on this. I don't know what they've been doing up to now, but clearly not enough.
Yeah,
It's not the regional council's.
So probably an opportunity or a gap that you've identified that we can.
Exactly, is what you just said. Why I'm saying it is we could all sit around passing the buck, central government's fault. It's their problem, well, they've got to fix
We
the
need to
rules
lobby
like Frank's saying, which I don't disagree with. So we sit there, so we just do nothing, carry on our own little world, and that's out of our sphere, which I don't believe it is.
We should be lobbying. We should be lobbying. Yeah.
Because the examples out there, to be quite honest, are horrific for people living in rural areas.
And it's everywhere. It's not just in Wairarapa. It's all over the country.
So that's a really good example of how we need to ground truth these desktop exercises around where the climate risks are and where some of the gaps in the response are. I think we could probably dig into that at the end session, yeah.
There is one method that we're running through the regional policy statement to develop a regional forest spatial plan, which is like actually identifying right tree, right place, but I'm talking about that, but later on.
Not too late.
Yeah. We've got James Baigent from the Insurance Council and Lucie Douma online as well, so I can pass over to them. Yes.
Can we put them down?
They want to share their screen. Yeah. Kia ora.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully this will work and I can just take over the screen.
Yeah, we can hear.
Oh, she is on.
Oh, yeah, true.
Yeah, I know. Are they going to use these slides? Okay. We can see you.
We can see you, but not your slides yet. I'm sure if she can hear us.
All right, I'll try again. Maybe, James, do you want to do a quick introduction first and then I'll try and just get these slides on?
Totally. Thank you so much. And Good afternoon, everybody. I don't want to take too much of your time, especially given we've got a learned representative of New Zealand's largest rural insurer on the line, and she's going to potentially provide a richer information set for you, given the rural considerations of this group. I'm James Baigent. I'm the resilience leader at the Insurance Council of New Zealand. And if there's one thing you take away from this call, it's the reason that the board allocated funding to my role to begin with, which is the nature of climate change has meant that insurers are taking a much more proactive role, in particularly messaging to communities and to local government that insurance is there as an ally and a supporter of action to reduce natural hazard risk, particularly climate related risk, so that insurance markets are affordable and accessible out into the future. I'm not sure, Lucie, if you could just jump to the next slide. It says a little bit about us. Key point is we're the representative of the general insurers, which includes the likes of FG, which is your largest rural insurer. And as I've just said, we're advocating for a strong and affordable insurance sector and enhancing the safety and protection of New Zealanders. And if we just go to the next slide, which sets out the context that insurers are operating in. So this is data that this is insured losses as a consequence of extreme weather going back to Cyclone Giselle in the late 1960s through to 2022. So you can see that clearly a picture of rising losses from extreme weather. Now, the reason why we have to break this graph up like this is because when we add 2023, next slide, please, it blows it all out of the water. Which is again demonstrating the climate change reality of extreme weather-related risk that's faced by New Zealanders. So insurers are now stepping up a lot of advocacy and engagement in the space of basically coming in and support. I've just been listening to the conversation for about 20 minutes and coming in and supporting those absolutely core actions that are being taken at local and regional level to reduce natural hazard risk so that insurance markets are accessible and available. I'm going to hand over to Lucie now because she's a much more professional expert in the insurance world than I am, and I don't want to take up any more of your time.
Thanks, James. And I'm not quite sure that that's true, but yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Lucie, so I'm the Head of Client Strategy and Loss Prevention Advice for FMG. So I just wanted to stay on this slide for a second because what you can see there with Cyclone Gabrielle and the Auckland anniversary floods is they have far outstripped any of the events in the past. So those events alone, that was actually for FMG, that was our biggest event in our history. Like the claims we received in the first week was more than the total combined for Christchurch and Kaikoura earthquakes. So one thing that we're starting to see is that the insurance risk is now being driven by extreme weather. In the past, that used to be by earthquakes. So now it's with the extreme weather and with floods, wildfires, as you've pointed out earlier, and windstorms as well, as we just saw down in the south. As insurers, the way that we're responding to that is we're starting to test that climate stress and undertaking scenario planning as well. So really to assess our solvency and pricing affordability. So this is known as our climate related disclosures. They are mandatory for all insurers and banks to now provide publicly. As can be found on our website, and it discusses 3 potential future scenarios where we have modelled what that looks like. So I do encourage you just to have a look at that online if you are interested in this. What that then means is, like, for us, hazard mapping is really important. Hazard mapping, like with these increased events that we're seeing, this is where your hazard mapping and data comes in. So the hazard mapping is really quickly becoming the backbone of insurance and how we make decisions on that pricing and the premium affordability. This data is really important to understand at property level. So as I believe Tom was talking about earlier, in the Wairarapa, you're going to see a lot more heat and less rain. But what does that mean at property level? So what is the actual associated risks with that and the risk that you need to manage? Because what we're still currently seeing is at this higher level where you're looking at that and it's difficult to then identify what is the actionable action that I can take to then reduce that risk. So with this data and this hazard mapping, it's not perfect yet, but it does keep improving, and that's happening really quickly. And as insurance companies, we invest a lot in our risk modelling data as well, so that we can get this as accurate as possible. And as this data does become more detailed, we'll actually be sharing it more with our clients as well, because it's not just with the premium differentiation, but also the properties. And as landowners, you'll be able to see where your risks are and the modelling that we've got with that. And then that can help with your long-term planning as well, where you then choose to build your assets and your sheds and those sorts of things in future. So what does this mean for price? How does climate risk impact on price? As you can see on that wheel there on the right, so 45% of an average premium for a house is put into claims. So that's our claims cost. Then we have the operational expenses. That includes our reinsurance. So the reinsurance is the insurance that we need as an insurance company, and this comes from offshore. This is influenced by global catastrophe losses, not just New Zealand's. And we're starting to see with these increased events globally that those premiums are rising for us, which then flows through to New Zealand premiums. This is across the board. This is not just an FMG trend. What we're also seeing there is the makeup of the government levies, FENS and GST and the Natural Housing Commission. Hazard Commission, sorry. So that makes up now 40% of a typical like home insurance premium. And these, like those, particularly for Natural Hazards Commission and FENS, their funding is almost entirely made up of the premiums that's added to insurance premiums. So this does create a bit of a spiral if it, where if we're seeing higher levies, which are going to come on next year for FENS in particular, then fewer people will choose to insure their assets or may take some off. So then levy revenues drop, levy rates rise because they still need an income, they still need to pay for their costs, and that then climbs premiums further for those that still have the insurance. This does impact affordability and access. So we work really closely with ICNZ along with the other insurance companies, because this is a big risk for us and for New Zealand as a whole, and we advocate quite a bit to government on these issues to try and actually keep those premiums down, because what we do see with the Natural Hazards Commission, they cover for a house when there is a natural hazard event like an earthquake or a flood, they'll cover up to 300k for that the cost of the damage, and then the private insurers will do the rest. But because they are across the whole country, they also need their own reinsurance. And because they don't do risk-based pricing or, manage those risks, or even they don't do a lot in risk reduction, then their reinsurance costs have gone up quite a bit more than what you're seeing in the private insurance companies. So that then gets passed across in the form of a levy. Hence why the work that we do with ICNZ is actually really important. And it's also important that these levy funds, that they don't just cover the claims or the response to that event, but they need to invest in reducing the risk as well. And that's where we work together too with our loss prevention, because climate resilience, it's a shared responsibility. So insurance essentially is just a way of transferring your risk, doesn't reduce the risk. So for FMG, what we spend quite a bit of time in is loss prevention. So how do we help reduce those risks so that you don't see as many claims coming through, or you're mitigating against what that, how susceptible you are to a certain risk. Like if you've got a flood, then you're building on stilts or you're building in a higher location. So we're starting to share that data with our clients, which is proving really useful. But yeah, we also appreciate these conversations. They're not easy, because when you're talking about climate risk, it's we need to be talking about adaptation, but also mitigation. They go hand in hand. We can't just be talking about mitigation and then not adapting to this, because we can all see that our climate is changing. The data says it, but it's also how do we adapt to that as well as mitigate. They do go hand in hand. So yeah, that was mainly what I wanted to cover today. Does anyone have any questions?
I'll ask you to do you give any preference for forestry blocks which have their own fire protection?
Yeah, so FMG covers very little forestry. So we're not, it's really in their managed growth areas for forestry. So I couldn't really comment on that because we'll only cover forestry if we've already got a large client doing something else. Because we do see the risk of what forestry does, so we don't insure in that sector.
How far the hazard data mapped for the Wairarapa? We've seen some recently done around flooding, but what about generally?
What about what, sorry?
Hazard mapping in the Wairarapa. Where are you with that?
Oh, well, we have different data than some of the councils because we do get our own hazard mapping data from offshore. We're getting more granular with that. And so that's what I was talking about before. We're actually right at the moment in contracting with a company that goes to a very granular level. And we want to be able to open that up to our clients as well. So those that work with us, that they'll be able to see that data so that we can work with our clients of where should we be building, how do we reduce these risks, so that we can continue getting insurance.
Hi Lucie, it's Tom. Can I follow up on that? Maybe this is a question for you, James, as well. Just around this idea of sharing data under the National Adaptation Framework. And we saw last week that the Earth Sciences Institute, formerly NIWA, published a national flood map, which is great, but when you zoom into your property, it stops working. Clearly, Greater Wellington and the new water schemes and councils have much better data. Insurance sector's also got data around the same hazards. How can we conceivably align those systems through the National Adaptation Framework? And also, if you'd like to, I'd love to have you involved in the regional adaptation framework approach.
Thanks, Tom. And I think the answer to your question was probably embedded within it, which is that alignment is absolutely critical. That's part of the National Adaptation Framework, which insurers support is the standardisation and improvement of data. That's particularly so people out in the world, consumers of data, can have a standard readout on their risk that they can be confident in no matter where they are in New Zealand. And I think the point you made is obviously that we are not there yet, which doesn't help with the risk literacy that we want to see. And I think Lucie touched on how FMG are working with their customers to improve that. And that's something all of our members would echo. The other important point is having a really strong, universal, consistent baseline of flooding data for all of New Zealand is a priority. Individual insurers will always use their own models to determine their commercial strategy for pricing risk. That's unlikely to change. That's often because Lucie's touched on reinsurance. So reinsurer, for example, an insurer of an insurer will potentially insist on an insurer using a recognised global private flood model to determine their exposures. That's very likely to continue. And particularly, I think this is probably a conversation that could take us all afternoon, and I'm sort of almost hesitant to open it, but we are seeing this, and Lucie's touched on it as well, as in the insurance world, there is a move from what was historically community-based risk pricing to sort of individualised risk-based pricing, which is what you had, whereas you might have had a set of data to determine the risk at a kind of a parcel of land or a patchwork of land, whereas now data is becoming so sophisticated in terms of how hazards are modelled that you can sometimes have, I think one insurer will use up to something, the quote was something like 3,000 individual data points for an individual property. That's even things like the floor level of that property, for example. So there's almost like the direction is to have where insurers using as much data as possible to get as precise as possible understanding of the risk that that property is facing. So I don't know if that's sort of the back end of what an insurer does, but the most critical point is that we want to see really high, good quality, consistent data standards across New Zealand through the National Adaptation Framework so that people can make really good decisions about risk.
Thank you. Unless there's any more burning questions, we'll move on. Brilliant. Thank you so much for coming along. You're welcome to continue to listen in if you choose. But regardless, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So let's just go back to sharing
screen.
Yeah, sharing us. Here we go. I've got it open in a window.
Oh, cool.
We click window here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it should be there. I think we closed it, but here it is open. Just go to present mode. Right. Jeannie, you're up. Next.
I'm cutting into your lunch break.
Uh,
Can we handle it? Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No problem. Yeah. I had a new term. I knew the term hangry, but recently I anxious, and I thought, oh, that's so hopefully everyone's well nourished. It's awesome to see this great turnout of new councillors, especially.
Okay.
Because some of the people that have been involved for longer, like Brian Della, know quite a lot about my work already, so this will be boring for you. But there's lots of people here that haven't heard the stuff, so that's awesome.
Yeah.
Are you going to be the clicker? I've got actually too many slides. This.
Hold on. There we go.
Yeah. Some of you guys might have been involved in this. My name is Jeannie Marks, and I'm program director for the Wairapa Waters Resilience Work Program, and I've been working with a governance group to support the implementation of this feast, which has involved a whole bunch of community input, and it was finalised in 21, led by Dame Margaret Baisley, had a whole bunch of stakeholders involved. Lines up very well with our economic development strategy, also the regional development strategy, and all sorts of plans, including the Whātua implementation plan. So there's a whole bunch of linked strategies and plans that all point towards the importance of addressing water resilience for our region. Next slide. It's a holistic strategy that captures all kind of aspects of water resilience. So this is not, let's build a dam and then we're water resilient. This is about what are all the things we've got to do as a region to become more resilient for our environment, our people, our economy. And attenuation is how much water do we hold in our landscape through however we manage it. How much water do we store? How do we actually keep improving our allocation system over time as quantities and I guess the amounts change through seasons, so that there might be different ways of thinking about allocation. At the moment, we've got a first come, first serve. You guys know that. You've got certainly our rural community. We've got our consents and we use what we've got when we can. And then there's land use adaptation. Tom talked a little bit about this. We're going to have to face the fact that we'll probably have to adapt one way or another. More or less forestry, more or less pineapples, whatever. There's going to be some changes that we're going to have to face one way or another. So how do we do that? And the strategy ended up with this huge list of recommendations, very comprehensive, but not really a clear answer of, so who does that and who pays for that? So then COVID happened and local water done well happened, and so we didn't really do anything for a while. Let's move on. And so only in the last 18 months, we got together and went, hey, let's just have the councils and the regional council, the local councils here and regional council come together and go, how do we actually make a start? What are our responsibilities? What are we accountable for individually or together? And work what we can do to actually make a really good start that goes beyond, rules that councils, district councils do, or the general work that Greater Wellington does in terms of flood protection and some of the other things. How do we actually make sure that everything we do works towards increasing our resilience? And I wanted to share some outcomes from a little economic report that we've just finished as part of this work that shows the value of water resilience for our economy. You guys know all this, and this has been really well covered by Tom, I feel. We're an agricultural region. I live here in the Carterton District, but most of us that live here are involved with the food and fibre sector in many ways, even if it's just our kids having friends that have got go to farms and hang out there. We're all connected. All of our manufacturing processing is connected. Most health and safety incidents in our Marsden Hospital were either kids falling off ponies or motorbikes. I mean, we're a rural community. That's who we are. And we are absolutely in the water is what keeps us going in many ways, including our manufacturing and processing plants. You know, a timber mill needs reliable water, Hansel's needs reliable water. It's a key aspect of how we work as a community. This little bit of these graphs, they look a little small. I don't know if it shows the significance, but I got our water scientists at Greater Wellington to model what life might look like in terms of irrigation and no take days. So days where you have to cease to take from your consents because the rivers have reached environmental limits. Currently ranged sort of 0 to 20 days, probably less than 10 every given year. You're going to have to stop irrigating. And then those being consecutive days happens a few times. Towards the end of the century, we're looking at many days and many of those being consecutive, which really starts becoming significant for anyone who grows any horticultural crops, arable crops, seeds, and of course also pasture. So even though this doesn't look gigantic, there's actually a massive shift in terms of the reliability and security you feel in terms of your farming business. Next slide. This is not really new, and this is like this one slide is a tour de force of Wairarapa's history and looking for water storage. And Fran, you've been involved in this a lot, and lots of people have been probably. It all got spurred from a water availability crisis in the 90s, right through nearly finding the perfect site, not being able to make it work. From a consenting based on the storage design space, as well as probably the economics. Couldn't make it work. So a lot of effort went into this project of finding the Whakamutunga Dam, and we couldn't get it across the line. And there was really good reasons for it. And in the report, when this is published, it gets explained, but you can also talk to me about that. I didn't want to talk about this for ages because there's a lot of grief and a lot of energy that went into this. And there's lots of reasons why it didn't work. And some of those reasons are really good. So anyway, we looked into that. Next one. This is just to show you that basically we looked at the Ruamahanga catchment because that's the one that we can probably play with most in terms of increasing water resilience. The dry eastern hills. This is where we'd be looking at, like you guys have been mentioning, you know, better on-farm storage, better water reserves for use in the eastern hills or for managing forest fires or whatever. But we've been looking at what can you do in the Ruamahanga catchment that increases our resilience in terms of our economic resilience based on water security. Well, this is what this particular project is about that I want to talk about. And this is just to show that we're mostly non-dairy pastoral. The permanent tree stuff, that's actually just clipping into our beautiful forest park. So that's why that's so high, not because everyone's got planted out there riparian margins, which, you know, we all should and we are, but that big bar is because of that. Then we've got a bit of dairy, miscellaneous farming. I think that's everyone's alpacas and ponies and stuff, probably. And then a bunch of other things that very little horticulture, very little arable at this point. Next slide. So what we did is we hired some experts who worked through what if we take everything we know about climate change and everything that Tom was talking about and go, how are we likely to use our land? What are the opportunities if we had water security, not necessarily much more quantity, just security, as in you had it when you needed it versus you didn't. We found that in all cases, there was a decline in livestock farming. And we worked with a lot of experts on this. There's a likely growth in arable land use, cropping, horticulture, and urban development. I mean, Wairarapa is set to keep growing. We're a high growth area now nationally, and we will continue to be that. But it would be greater if we were more resilient. And of course, water means choices. So the economic diversification is likely to be higher, and that in itself makes us more resilient than not having that. So I'll show you some economic figures. But then we've modelled, oh no, I think the next slide is just a table. Go to the next slide. We went through, this is a summary of what we did, but basically we looked at every bit of land use in the Wairarapa and we worked out, would there be more of it, would there be less of it if we had water security? And where are the areas that we see huge opportunity? And because we'd be losing some sheep and beef and all, there was a lot of space to gain for arable seeds, arable grains, and horticulture in terms of water security, especially the high value stuff. Next slide. And then we modelled that in terms of its economic benefit and found that it's having water security and having the ability to diversify into horticultural and seed growing would likely translate into a 1.5 billion annual GDP growth for the Wairarapa, which is significant because even though it's sort of going up anyway with little inflation and everything and population growth, that really puts us into a different space.
Can you just explain why arable that area? Because it seems that would use much more water.
Arable uses less water than pasture, irrigated pasture, but 75% less, but it needs it at a very particular time. And you can use precision irrigation in arable, which is quite useful. A huge bump as part of this is actually high value horticulture, where you have quite a lot of water, but it's over quite a small area, and you create a very high value product. So this is not threatening large sheep and beef farms. This is about what we do on our flats and how intensive can we get, and a very precise horticulture. If you're thinking about, say, Holland or the Netherlands having reduced their water take by 90%, but are creating 6 times more food than anyone else in Europe, just through precision high value, and they're not a low wage economy or anything, but long shot.
So that figure you've got there, is investment and the technology to do it?
No, that is just based on using statistics around profitability of all land users, looking at if you change the land use, how would it go up? So it's I'm sure you can drive mini trucks through it, but at the same time, I don't know how else you put anything in the future without, you make a whole bunch of assumptions, you test it with a whole bunch of experts, and you go, oh, well, that seems about right, and then you give it a go. Yeah.
You're probably right. Doesn't matter what numbers you put on the process.
That's right.
Look at Canterbury.
That's right.
Look at Ashburton. There's a 1-horse town.
Yeah.
And now it's just absolutely huge.
It's huge.
Financially huge, but there's more irrigation going in Canterbury all the time.
Yes, and so what we were looking at was mostly, rather than going, we didn't assume any growth in dairy, for example, which is obviously what they've done down there. They have gone increased a bit in seeds and grain too. We were looking mostly at horticulture and seed growing, because we think that those are the 2 growth opportunities for the Wairarapa, looking at climate change opportunities. Canterbury is looking at investing in the Wairarapa as part of its diversification, like the seed contractors, because of our increasing climate events. They're going, who else can do seeds like Canterbury? Oh, Wairarapa could, but only if they had secure water. Hawke's Bay is going, oh, who else could grow vegetables like us in Hawke's Bay, or fruit and fruit? Oh, Wairarapa could, with the shift in climate and things like cyclones coming through. Actually, they're looking at the whole east coast and thinking about how they diversify the risks. They being your tallies, your watties, your seed growers.
There was a major seed company a while ago, and they would have come in guns blazing into Wairarapa, but there was no consistent water available. They turned it down.
That's right. Water security is the key reason our growers get turned down in terms of the opportunities, despite having the perfect soils and the perfect climate, and it taking less water than our current farming practices. So there is opportunity there. With that also comes processing and manufacturing. So this uptick includes the jobs I was told to take the graph out. I showed you, there was an extra nearly 4,000 jobs for the Wairarapa
Oh, God, yeah.
equated to this, which is huge for us.
But the problem is, if you go back to what you said earlier, and I think you hit the nail on the head, is that all this is great, except we couldn't even get the dam at Kaituna going.
Yeah.
Because it was actually gazumped, I think, by regional council rules on the
But there was reasons for that.
end. Of course,
There's a lot of reasons for it, but yes, it did.
no, there's always reasons.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the right reasons, but there is reasons. But that's just the way it is, isn't it? But I think, if you're determined, which you should be,
Yeah.
to go down this track, then those reasons have got to be
Addressed.
like if you're gonna get on with something, you're gonna like private enterprise, you'll have all the reasons in the world why not to do it. And what we want to hear is the reasons why it should be done. So you've got.
This is one of the reasons.
Well, it should be.
No, the
That
change,
is one reason.
yeah, but the change in thinking is to go on the proactive. And not the
Yeah.
negative.
I'll go to my next slide, and see if that gets you somewhere. Probably not, but hey. There's a whole bunch of stuff we don't know yet, actually. And these are part of the things that we will need to know to have a good reason to be able to ameliorate any concerns about what we should be doing. Some of it is that there's some water stuff that we could get better at knowing, exactly which water, for example, we've done the SkyTeam, we know quite a bit about our substrates, but we don't know yet. I couldn't tell you right now whether it was better to build a dam or go for a deep water aquifer or to do none of those things. I don't actually know that because we haven't really done the work. We haven't really worked out exactly how much water do they need. I think we've tried when we did the table, and our water resilient scenario actually used less water. And then we freaked out and then we thought, oh, we probably had it all wrong. But I still think this might be true because if you did precision agriculture and irrigation and horticulture, you might use a lot less than we currently do. So all of that needs to be kind of worked through. Yeah.
Just a question. This was done in 21.
Which one?
The
strategy.
Resilient strategy.
Yeah.
Does the late Dr. Bethana Jackson, she did a project called Lucie, and it's land utilisation capability indicator.
Yeah.
Has that been crossed with this?
Yeah.
And is it being utilised still?
I mean, we used it in this report to double check whether we felt like we had all the land use capability right.
So I thought she didn't finish that.
I mean,
this was due.
well, no, I just did this year. Those economic results are from this year.
No, I'm talking about the whole strategy.
Oh, the strategy. I don't know what
Lucie's project was not completed until after the strategy was.
Oh yeah, no, sorry, I don't know anything about what they used in the strategy. The strategy is quite general.
So that's what I'm asking, is the Lucie project being utilised now with
right?
What you're...
No, I don't utilise it like that. Maybe I'll have a look. I mean, I'd use the land use capability for sure. I'll check with you. What we thought in the end in terms of some of the barriers. So some of these, I hear this a lot, we just need to get on with it. We just need to get on with it. Get on with what is actually the question. What are we getting on with and who's getting on with it? Who's going to pay for getting on with it? Who's going to manage whatever we got on with? And who actually decides that? Because unless we have real answers for that, we will never be able to get past it. And this is because we're talking about a large infrastructure, actually. And we've, in a funny point in New Zealand, I would say generally, about how we invest in infrastructure. Who benefits? Who gets the profit? Who carries the risk? And unless we can answer that, it's not so much as to whether the dam was in the right space or not. I'm sure it is. Tonkin and Taylor did, I don't know how many millions of dollars worth of reports to say that's the spot. But who's going to pay for it? Who's going to make sure the design serves all of our needs? Is it going to help with flood protection? Is it going to help with keeping our rivers flushed? Is it going to help with providing all of the drinking waters for our communities? Or is it just a farmer's own thing? Is it going to generate electricity? there's a whole lot of questions that we need to actually work through and make sure we've got answers for before someone puts their hand up, it's going, I'm going to carry the cost, or I've got a finance model that works. I'm going to carry the risks because it's my job to carry the risks for this. Without knowing who carries it and who owns it, it's very difficult to actually make progress.
How do you get what's got the dam up Carterton? I thought you did a lot.
It was driven out of from existing farmers' needs to get enough water to their farms to carry on with their status quo. It didn't include electricity. It didn't include pipes. There was a whole bunch of questions and the towns kind of came in quite late. Meridian walked out because, you know, Meridian actually was making enough money doing with its existing infrastructure, so it didn't really feel like investing in our resilience. I've talked to the CEOs of dams down south, and I've talked to the councils down south, and they go, oh, we're totally undercapitalized in our dams. We made them as cheap as we could be. They now don't meet our earthquake dam regulations. Now we have to go back to central government to get that. They don't generate enough electricity, even though that's now our potentially highest income earner. They don't provide our towns with water, but they could be, because we made it so cheap to carry on, so to have our own farmers invest in them, instead of looking at what does actually the region need to be more resilient.
Jenny, you've got to the stage.
Yeah.
Are you now going to carry on and answer those questions?
I would like to. I don't know if I'm the decision maker for the answer.
It does beg the question, probably for Tom, but in terms of sort of overall water resilience, they are really relevant questions. But coming back to the earlier conversations around climate resilience and then coming back to central government.
Yeah.
Can you just run through how Greater Wellington is currently engaging with central government and what sort of
I can certainly
you're having and what's the
I can
feedback
talk to
coming out?
I can talk to you how I'm engaging central government on this.
Yeah,
But you might have bigger, wider.
Through the leadership committee, the central government are partners on that leadership committee. They have yet to turn up to one of the leadership committees since the last national general election.
Next year, folks.
Yeah. No, local government is pretty bad at lobbying central government. Yeah, we are really.
Just don't do it properly.
New Zealand was originally involved in this rolling.
Well,
If Irrigation New Zealand had the Wairarapa as one of its priority areas, and I know they were engaging the government, has anything developed from that?
yeah, so through this program, so this program is funded by all councils, right? Including Carterton. And it enables us to have these kinds of conversations with central government. So we certainly talk to our local MPs. We talk to MPI about their new water strategy and their developments there. It's so slow. Maybe they get somewhere one. They say it's imminent. MFE is kind of withdrawn within itself, I think, as it's trying really hard to get the RMA things out for Christmas. So that they're a bit of a write-off at the moment, I must say. But MB Kānoa, that's our Regional Infrastructure Fund people. We're all working really closely, absolutely working with Irrigation New Zealand. They're actually coming up against the same barriers. We're looking at systems overseas, how things get funded, how outcomes are achieved. We had a great tour from the ex-CEO of Tasman Irrigation, who was talking about how they were leveraging funding and investment. So we're trying to learn and we're trying to bring all of that knowledge to the Wairarapa through this program so we can start overcoming some of these real barriers. Can I go to the next slide? So we do have a bit of a framework, but we have to address these key issues. We will not get somewhere, or we'll get something bad or sort of cheap or not quite right, I think, if we don't fully work out what we really want. And so I guess what I was just been saying is sort of this is where we ended up. It's quite tricky to push through it. What I'd like to say about this program is that it brings the councils and mana whenua together to actually think about this issue. Current word on the street in central government is that the Wairarapa is uninvestable because we do not work together. We don't have a clear vision. We don't have councils working together on what they really want. We don't articulate how that actually, what that looks like. And I would like to change that. I think we can get somewhere. I think we can be an investable region. I don't like MPs saying that. I don't like ministers saying that. Shane Jones said that. Like, lots of people said that. Wairarapa's uninvestable. We just can't work with you guys. We'd love to give you some money. We just can't.
We had a change of leadership, like, should we write that?
So I think programs like this and also the Wellington Regional Leadership Committee, there's real opportunities. And I'm really hoping that with Tom having his feet under the desk now, like we can really work out what that looks like in terms of the adaptation. Because I think for us in the Wairarapa, adaptation means investment in some infrastructure that keeps our economy safe and therefore our communities and our workers and our children and everybody in our infrastructure safe. So we will need to invest in the Wairarapa.
Is MB saying that the councils need to amalgamate before they'll show the interest?
Working together is a good start. So there's lots of people saying lots of things, but I think the uninvestable thing can be achieved through many ways. But I think we should face it and work together. Yeah.
This is one of the, I'm just going to jump in. This is potentially a link to the National Adaptation Framework, right? Like,
yes,
water as a key issue and water resilience as a key issue. If we're looking at, you've already got a strategy, you're thinking about options around how
we've got governance in place, we've got leadership in place.
So there's a new pathway emerging through the National Adaptation.
We've invested in this work. Now, after the strategy, so the strategy was investment, then nothing happened for a while. That happens, that's all right. We're back. We're investing in having this group being fully engaged and having people work on this. We're working a lot with Greater Wellington. We've got a lot of the scientists, the cash fund people, the programs that link to it. But for us, there's more to it than that. It's not just Greater Wellington doing its job really well. It is about actually working out what do we need? Where do we want to go? What are we going to look like in 50 years' time? It's not telling a dairy farmer to stop your business today. It's about in 50 years, how's that land going to be used and how we're going to be set up to have choices.
If you put water in, it's a bit like Canterbury. If you put water in, the land use change will take care of themselves.
Yeah.
Just the economics. So private enterprise will take care of that. So
I agree. It could.
Absolutely. So I suppose my point is like, I just thought, I've always thought water resilience, water storage is the key for the Wairarapa. But to see that dam at Carterton gazumped for whatever reason, it was extremely disappointing to a lot of people. But I believe that when you look at, when you start looking at councils and not getting on, I think that I'd say that's past.
You reckon?
No. You better
find out tomorrow.
you better, I know you probably feel like you're banging your head on against the brick wall sometimes, but I'd be moving forward on this and put the past behind you, and I'd be going to the current new leadership, particularly like all of them are here.
Oh yeah.
But you're going to have a different platform to work on, I believe.
Absolutely. I still think that, absolutely. We need to really think about whether that was a good place for it, whether that is what we really want compared to some other options. Because honestly, if we have significant deep aquifer water, it might be a better investment. I don't know. At the moment, we're going for lots and lots of little storage places that are plastic lined all over the shop. Is that what we want? I don't know. We need to think about it. But if we are getting if we do want to invest in a significant storage area, let's do it right. And let's make sure we meet all of our environmental ambitions that we can help dams meet. And damming, oh, by the way, the word dam is a little bit misleading. It was always off-river storage. So let's be really clear about that. No one's ever said, let's dam a gorge or something. We're looking at the Kaituna place. It was flooded in 2 farms, right? So it is obviously massive, and it's a big land use change, going from, terrestrial to aquatic. But no one was damming a river. It was always taking water off the river at high flows. But you cannot, and this will never happen, it wouldn't happen now, You can't say the distribution system is through having people take water at low flow at critical times, which was the model that these guys were going for.
Even in climate resilience, by taking flood water, excess water out,
Yeah.
you're reducing the risk of floods downstream.
Absolutely.
So we're-
It's designed well, yes.
Perfect.
And if we design it well, we would be able to help with flood resistance. We would be able to supplement our rivers at low flow to keep them ecologically healthy. We would be able to supply all towns with all of their municipal water. And we would be able to provide probably expensive water to farmers that would drive intensification. We would then need to make sure the impacts were managed in a way that you wouldn't have your nitrate crisis that you've got in Canterbury. Whether it's a crisis or not depends on who you talk to. But there has been, that's around discharge. So that's a different, from a regulatory world, that's a different way of dealing with it. So one is supply and then one is what happens with it and how to use it.
A large part of this is also dependent on RMA reform too, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's right. I talked to the Water Users Association on last week on Thursday and they're very excited.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
The rules do allow storage on site, obviously, with limited.
So Greater Wellington supports,
That's
Because
no one is anti-storing water. There's no single piece of I'm saying our plans isn't Greater Wellington's plans. There's no piece there that says we're not into storage. No one says that. Wellington itself, Wellington City, has got plenty of water storage. In fact, it's just building some more. Not for irrigation though.
No.
So the thing is, it's a different quantities, right? Municipal is tiny compared to what we use in agriculture.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask a broad question actually to Tom and yourself, and it's about reforestation and native riparian planting and blue-green corridors, which I was looking at the other day, none of which I understand, but does reforestation and riparian planting support kind of water conservation and resilience?
So that goes under what I mentioned before in the word attenuation. This is around how much water we hold. So generally slowing water down the catchment can really help replenish our aquifers and replenish our streams. And so the more we plant, the better. If we're looking at a massive expansion in horticulture with precision irrigation, if anything, you'd think you'd be freeing up a lot of land that you can actually then use for native restoration or restoration of wetlands. So this is just about how we choose to use the land. If you're using it in a low productivity sense, you're using up large lands, it's kind of traditional for us, right? We've got these huge farms with grass on them. Yeah. So that's very different to precision horticulture. And we don't have to do none of that and all of that. It's actually just
but if you start creating bigger islands and more well-protected streams and all that sort of thing.
You'll be looking after your water quality better, but also you are enhancing availability because it travels more slowly down the catchment, which means that you can, if you're a water user and you're abstracting it, you've got more water coming for longer into the season because it's traveled slower. And so we're working, or at least we're engaging with hydrologists through Sustainable Wairapa who'd be really interested in looking at some engineered, nature-based engineering solutions that of bunds and ways of holding water for longer, so you can actually have it travel more slowly through the groundwater, which makes it available for longer to our users at the bottom of the catchment.
So I think I did ask this question the other day. Obviously, you're doing lots of reforestation on regional parks and everything. And I asked the question about subsidisation, I think, but currently farmers just do it out of goodwill. But
that's significant.
Is there
Greater Wellington has subsidies?
Yeah, there is subsidies.
Huge subsidies. Yeah, that's paid for half of mine. I don't know. I think 50% is pretty high. And that's the hills here compared with in Hawke's Bay.
Yeah,
there's been over the years of the catchment boards and then the regional council much more money in planting here than in Hawke's Bay actually. It's got more stability in the hills here. Still not perfect, but it's better.
Is the what Jeannie was talking about before is this idea of doing one thing that has multiple benefits, right? Like, so it's about strengthening your business case. So if we're advocating for a business case to do some of these things through Treasury, that the more things like that we can hit, the better chance you get for actually getting that money out. So you're talking about flood protection, water quality improvements, biodiversity improvements, et cetera, et cetera.
And maybe even some electricity generation while we're at it.
Can I just ask you, is there any indication when the results of the SkyTem surveying done? Because I mean, everybody saw a helicopter flying around the valley sometime and everyone got really excited.
It's up. I'll show you the link.
Okay,
I'm
well,
sorry you didn't get invited.
seen anything really promoted in the paper.
Ah, well, we did, there was press releases.
Oh, okay, yeah, well, I'm out of all that now, so I'm too busy out there grinding away on the farm like John is.
Yeah.
We don't see all these things at the time.
You do need a PhD to read it.
What does it actually state then? What's the result?
Yeah.
It's simple.
My result, what, $1.5 billion not big enough result for you?
SkyTem.
Okay, SkyTem, it shows lots of layers of rocks and different types of materials. Because that's what SkyTem does. SkyTem is an electromagnetic kind of survey of the lithography, which is like, what are the stones like? And based on the stones, we can tell what the likelihood of water is. That's all it does. So what it allows you to do, that tool, is you can put a pin, drop a pin on a map, and it'll show you exactly what your sediment's like. That's all it does. What we need to do with it next is work out at key places of pressure or of interest, whether we do more modelling work around the water there. But that's Greater Wellington's currently thinking about it. It's expensive, slow stuff. Science.
So they haven't actually said there's a whole lot of water.
No one's saying you go heaps of water, drill here. No, we didn't quite get to that point, and I don't know if we will.
Areas.
It was never meant to. No, John, it was never meant to actually discover water. It was always understood that it would just tell us where we would most likely find it if we.
It was a way of updating our hydrology models, because we've got a whole bunch of older models, and they help us, or help Greater Wellington make work out what to allocate, how to consent stuff. And this was just a better way of testing and modelling how our water moves.
Yeah, flow paths within on a regional basis.
So what's your time frame for finding out how much water's under that, like going to those likely sites?
There isn't.
There is currently no project for that. There's no funding for that. There's no project for that. But I think it's been thought about. Definitely. Tash, do you guys know?
Yeah, it's not a space I'm working in personally, but yeah, if the council is talking about where to.
As part of the Warrapa Water Resilience Program, it's been identified as a key priority over the next 5 years to get better at working out what's next for SkyTem and how do we want to use it and how do we want to invest in it. But we probably need to seek some central government funding. This stuff's really expensive. Yeah, I got to look that. I'm going to have some lunch before people get anxious.
Yeah. Have a lunch break.
I'm going to be around for lunch, so keep talking.
How are we going for time with you?
We're behind the phone, so we might take it.
I have no idea.
Yeah, we've got, so
I
next.
don't think we got set the agenda individually, so.
So next time the agenda is briefly about regional policy statement, and then Tash is going to talk about what the catchment team do. And we're hoping
Still working to 2 p.m.
2 p.m. And we're hoping to discuss with you guys about what and how we could actually work together better. So what information you like and how information we work together.
It's a team, right?
This great some lunch and bring it back to the table and carry on.
Yeah.
So give you one.
Thank you for your support. It's not, that's okay. Remember, now that I've been.